Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to see you all here for this Calspra webinar. We are super excited to bring this to you today, not because the topic is necessarily a fun one, but because I know it's something that a lot of folks are struggling with, challenged with. It's not an easy thing. I remember back when I first started working in schools, it was very confusing because we worked so hard to bring people together, tell positive stories about our teachers and our schools. And then when there is somewhat of a rift, it's really challenging depending on how aggressive things get on either side. And sometimes our comms people definitely feel caught up in the middle and not really knowing what the right tone is and the right way forward is. So I'm grateful that one of our great partners, the California School Boards Association, um, provided this webinar. I think it was a few weeks ago, and I got a message from the county soups comms person, Kendra Britt, and she said, "You have to get people access to this webinar. It is exactly what CalSPR needs." So I love that we have people looking out for us and bringing us high quality content. I want to tell you a little bit about Troy and embarrass them a little bit because that's what we do. Because our PR people never say enough good things about themselves. So we got to do that for each other. Troy Flint leads communications for the California School Boards Association. CSBA represents nearly every school district and county office of education in the state of California and nearly 1,000 local education agencies in total, providing legislative and legal advocacy, governance training, policy development, information, research, and business services. He has 19 years of experience in education communication roles, including at Oakland Unified. So, he's got lots of street credibility there, both at the statewide policy and local school district levels, as well as a background in private sector public relations, and started as a journalist, as many of us did. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to Troy. But one quick thing, if you have a question, Troy has generously offered to answer them throughout the webinar. I will be monitoring the chat. So, if you can put your question into the chat, I will try and find a good spot in order to ask Troy to pause and answer your questions. All right, Troy, take it away.
Yeah, it's a bit of a longer presentation, so I'm going to try and do it more informally. So don't worry about breaking my flow. If you need to ask a question, it's probably better to deal with it in the moment. Also, our offices are under renovation, so I'm working from home, so I don't have my great NASA multiple monitor setup that I normally do. So I'm going to be focused on looking at my slides. So I may not see everything. So thank you, Trinette, for helping me out with that. Yeah, like Trinette said, I developed this presentation initially to give to a group of 32 districts. Probably most of you are aware that more than a year ago now that the California Teachers Association launched a campaign called We Can't Wait to synchronize the expiration of bargaining unit contracts across the state and to uh, do what essentially is cross-district bargaining. So instead of having districts bargaining in isolation, they're using a shared set of talking points, of shared set of demands. Even if they're not exactly the same, they're pointed in the same direction. And all this is happening at one time to sort of create a wave of momentum and to put more pressure on districts. And I guess theoretically on the state as well, though right now it feels like the focus is really on locals that are bearing the burden. And I have to say, it's been very successful. I mean, there have been a number of labor actions, including strikes, which I don't think anyone really wants. So, I mean, maybe success isn't the best word, but certainly in terms of garnering attention, it's been effective. And in terms of when I look at the settlements and I look at the district's financial situations as well as sort of the larger state budget picture and the macroeconomic picture. I think that the settlements have been very favorable to CTA and is probably fair to say that they're winning the PR war if there is such a thing. And so the purpose of this document is or this presentation is really to show some practices that you can employ, which I think will help you get your story out. We're working from a disadvantaged position as people who represent management in a sort of oppositional relationship to people who are representing teachers, at least in the context of collective bargaining. So it's always going to be an uphill battle, but there are things that you can do, I think, to make your situation more favorable. And so we'll go into those without any further ado. Let me share my let me set up the slideshow and share my screen. All right. Can everybody see the title page?
Yes.
Good. So, column strategies for a new collective bargaining landscape. And we're calling it a new landscape because things are a lot different than they were 2 years ago. I already kind of prefaced the We Can't Wait campaign, and the title says it that they're really putting a moral dimension and that this has to happen now. CTA has really created this sense of urgency. And you see that, I think, in the news coverage and in some of the language that we're seeing from districts, uh, from the local bargaining units in districts. Where I came from before, CSBA, Oakland has a very contentious history of labor union management. So it's not really surprising to see that happen there or in some places like Sacramento City, which have also had difficult labor relations. But just the other day on the news, I was watching Dublin protesters. And, as somebody who worked and lived a long time in the East Bay, Dublin is an area that's seen as I don't know, very, very stable, not the type of place where you would be having these conflicts. But this We Can't Wait campaign has kind of pushed this more adversarial form of engagement to places that it wasn't always before. And so, that really is on, sorry, accidentally. So that really is historic and unprecedented. And those are the terms that David Goldberg, who is president of CTA, has used to describe this movement, not just my words. So the total scale of We Can't Wait is 32 districts that represent 77,000 educators and 1 million students. So that's almost one out of every, well, actually a little more than one out of every six students in the state are impacted by that campaign. But the actual impact is greater than that because there's a runoff effect where even if you're not a district that's targeted by the We Can't Wait campaign, people are seeing the news, they're hearing these comments, and so that creates sort of a Me Too or a follow-on effect where it's impacting the entire dynamic for the whole state. And some of the common themes at stake in these negotiations are obviously compensation. Everybody knows that, but also, sorry, keep hitting my mouse, class size, resources for staff and students, and something that CTA has really targeted, I think, more explicitly now than in the past is this issue of reserves and the idea that districts are hoarding money that they could or should be giving to staff, as opposed to, what our frame would be is that these reserves are needed for a rainy day. And yeah, things look pretty good now, but they can turn really quickly. Those of you who've been around for a while, when the dot-com boom in 2001, or I think that was 2001, when the market collapsed for the Great Recession in 2007, 2008, what looks like hoarding and a big stockpile will go really quickly. So I think that's something to try and communicate. We kind of covered this, so I'll go over this slide quickly. Another point that CTA is emphasizing, in addition to class sizes, compensation, and better wages, is stability for school communities, opposition to layoffs or closures. And it's something that I would point out is, in some ways, this is almost contradictory or a conflicting demand. Because if you over invest in the current moment and have a contract that's more generous than you can afford, then when that bill comes due a few years down the line, there are going to be probably more layoffs than if you were responsible and gave a more modest raise or a more modest health package. So you can win the moment, but you win the battle, but lose the war. So I think there's an argument to be made that a responsible, a generous, but within reason offer to a bargaining unit is the better path to long-term stability than something that feels good in the moment, but sets you up for failure down the road. And so that's the pushback against using the reserve now or taking it down to a very low level or almost zero. So some other narrative themes is comparing California's wealth versus district scarcity. In one sense, I like this. I often make the claim California, if it were an independent nation, would be the fourth wealthiest economy in the world in terms of GDP, and we should invest more in education. But the problem is this argument is misdirected when you're talking about school districts, because obviously you all know we have very limited ability to impact our revenue. Yeah, I mean, over 80% of the revenue that a local school district has comes from the state. And if you're a high LCFF district, even more of your money is coming from the state. So, very little ability to impact revenue positively at a district level, especially in an era of declining enrollment. It's just not something that we can do. And so our argument has been, yes, we share a lot of the same desires that you have, but we need to work together and put the pressure on the state. Right now, just one example is Prop 98. The last few years, the administration has tried to manipulate Prop 98. There's a withholding of $5.6 billion, which is due to public schools. We're lobbying to get that money for schools, and we may sue if we have to. We've sued, just a couple years ago on a similar issue. It was a smaller amount then, but they're getting bolder now. But that $5.6 billion is equivalent to more than $900 a student. That's money that could be put toward these contract agreements that we don't have access to right now. So that's the type of issue where really the focus needs to be on the state. The other issue that's been raised a lot, I saw this especially in San Diego and LA, but I'm sure in the Bay Area, which is crazy expensive, it's an issue as well. And Sacramento's not, where I live, is not cheap anymore either. So no, almost nowhere is. But it's the cost of living and proximity of educator housing. I mean, again, yes, that is a hugely valid concern. It's the number one concern of voters in California is housing affordability. But what is the ability of the school district to make settlements based on an issue that the state as a whole can't get a handle on? So we do have a program for educator workforce housing, and there are opportunities to do things here and there, but that's not going to fundamentally change the scope of this cost of living issue. So again, more reason to direct it to the state. Staffing shortages. Again, I think locals are working hard to find the best employees that you can, people who are qualified to be instructors or in support role for students. And if those people were available, we would be putting them in classroom. The staffing shortages are basically a function of larger macroeconomic factors. And yes, you can make yourself a little bit more attractive by increasing your compensation package. But one district acting alone is not going to fundamentally change the dynamic. And you still have to work within the confines of what's economically responsible. Okay. So I alluded to in my opening that the fact that you have so many districts with contracts that are up at once sort of raises the expectation because you see other districts going out on strikes. So that normalizes the strike in a way that it happened. We talked about districts that have never been on strike. San Francisco hadn't been on strike in 52 years. I mentioned Dublin, Washington Unified, I believe, which is right next to Sacramento, across the river in West Sacramento, is scheduled to go out, I think, on Monday. Natomas just settled a strike, which is another district here in Sacramento. A few others I'm not thinking of right now, but it's clear there's a wave. And also, if you have one district that gives a raise that maybe is they can't afford, that puts pressure on other districts to meet that standard because otherwise they look like they're being cheap or they're not doing their best to serve their students and staff. But really, what they're doing is holding the line on what is doable without being reckless. So you have to communicate that as a school board we have a responsibility to the students in this district and to this community first and foremost. And yes, we look at what other districts are doing and we factor that into our calculations, but our decisions are made based on our economic environment and our financial situation and our determination of what we can give to reward our teachers without putting us in peril. And I would say that what I call media imprinting is going on. I see not always, but quite a bit that the media is accepting the school district arguments, or I mean, sorry, not school district, the teachers unions arguments uncritically. And they when they repeat it without putting it in context, then that just sort of imprints the audience to think that it's true. And yeah, this last one about districts comms contamination, everybody becomes interconnected. It's not like if I'm the Sac City PIO, I'm just working in a vacuum with what's happening in my district. People are just so heavily influenced by what's going on in the other districts. So this next slide, again, I did this about 4 or 5 weeks ago when the focus was on some other districts. I could make a whole new slide now just with districts in the Sacramento area or just districts in the LA area. But this one talks about the Bay and San Diego. So you see some of the headlines: SF teachers overwhelmingly authorize their first strike in half a century. And here, if you go down on the left-hand side, this is kind of what I'm talking about when I reference the media presenting a lot of these issues uncritically. California faces teacher strikes across state for better pay and work conditions. I mean, I know it's a headline and you can really only do so much with the character count, but it just basically leaves the impression that that's the only issue is that they're not being paid well enough or that the work conditions are poor, and that's the result of some moral failing on the part of districts as opposed to this is what we can do in this environment. You see San Diego. San Diego actually avoided the strike, but they were going to go on their first strike in 30 years. And then this one about West Contra Costa, shows this statewide dimension and that the media is recognizing that this is not just isolated, that it's happening everywhere. So in San Diego was sort of its own special case where special education staffing was the primary issue there, and they were able to resolve that. But that's something that we've been hearing more and more. And that's one of the issues, the larger financial issues that I think average people don't understand is, and I'll get into this later, we have a lot of rising costs and the revenues are not rising to meet them. And special education is certainly one of those areas. In San Francisco, pay, healthcare, class size, student support, and the reserve issue that we talked. They want the districts to drain the reserve to pay these contracts now. San Francisco ended up settling for full healthcare for the first time. And I can't critique that decision because I'm not familiar with the details of their budget. But one thing I can say generally is that healthcare is a very complicated issue in these bargaining conversations because at least with salary, with wages, if you agree to an X% increase over Y years, that's going to amount to Z dollars roughly. It's you have some visibility about what your costs are going to be. Whereas healthcare is almost like an uncapped liability. You know it's going to go up at least 4 or 5% every year, maybe more, especially when you have to renew that contract and you don't know what rates you're going to renew the contract at, and your provider sort of has you over a barrel, or at least they have a lot of leverage in that situation. So you're talking about rising costs that you can't even predict going out indefinitely. So it's almost a situation where, dollar for dollar, you'd rather give a bigger raise and a slightly less generous healthcare package if you are in a situation where there's going to be a trade-off that's needed to keep you from going into a financially perilous situation. LA had very sim has some very similar requests, and then Contra Costa, sorry, settled for an 8% raise over 2 years and full health care as well. So these are what I call confounding factors. Maybe that's a little bit too complicated of a way of phrasing it. These are just things that make your life a lot harder on the management or the PI or the comm side. So there's asymmetric communication because of their status or their stature. And, unions are able to make really pointed, personalized criticisms or attacks in a way that districts should not mirror. You have to exercise restraint, even if they're questioning the integrity of the district or whether the district actually cares about children. These sorts of things that are often made. And, even though you wish it weren't the case, those type of ad hominem attacks do resonate with people, and it gives with certain people. And it does give the unions an advantage in that you have to be a little bit more vanilla in how you present some of your information. Sympathy deficit, everybody knows their teacher. We do polling all the time, and the teachers are so far and away the most popular category of employee or official within the education system. There's a well of goodwill there. So anything that could be framed as an attack on teachers is really could be really inflammatory. So I think it's very important as you're making these arguments to always lead with, teaching is an incredibly important job. It has the biggest impact on student achievement. We definitely want to reward our teachers because we want the best teachers. That's what's going to allow us to make progress in our job of getting more kids to proficiency, of getting more kids to graduate ready for college and career. We wouldn't undermine ourselves by shortchanging them unless it was necessary to keep the district stable, but always support and acknowledge the value of the teaching profession. Um, so another confounding factor is history, and this is something I'm really adamant about. And this involves good coordination between the communications team, whoever is the official spokesperson, whether it's the PIO or the board president or the superintendent, is that you need to know where you are in the negotiations and be honest with the people who have an external facing role about what you can settle at, and make sure that you're not sending the communications person out there to say things that make them look stupid shortly afterward, and by extension, make the district look bad. And what I mean specifically is what I see a lot is a district saying, there's no way we could give a 10% raise. That is so far beyond our 10% raise and full healthcare. So far beyond our means. It's ridiculous. And then they go out on strike. The union goes out on strike. Then 3 days later, the district settles for 9.5% in full healthcare. So basically, you made it obvious that you could have met that the whole time. You were just using it as a negotiating tactic, and then you settled for something very close to what the union's last demand was. So that really reduces your credibility. So if you know that you're going to give in or meet the union demand, don't be out there in public shortly before saying there's no way we can afford it, and then you turn around and do it, and now what is your reputation or your credibility with the public? So, I mean, again, I know a lot of times PIOs we get hung out to dry, but to the extent that you can have that honest communication with your bargaining team and they can set you up for success. So if you are going to come and meet the union, you can sort of ease into that, with the way that you're framing it instead of it being this abrupt situation where you said there's no way we can afford it, and now we are. This point, there's nothing really you can do at an individual district level, but just to be aware of the context that you're operating in. Right now, it's hard financial times for districts. We have a number of districts, including some pretty large, prominent districts that are running deficits over $100 million. Sac City, where my kids go to school, Oakland, where I worked and lived for many years. San Francisco has an enormous deficit and has some level of state intervention, even though they're not fully in receivership. Uh, so when the average person sees all this coverage of district financial mismanagement or say management that's less than optimal, it makes them suspicious, that other districts, even if you are a district that is not in financial trouble, is using all these funds appropriately, and that can diminish the sympathy toward districts and whether people believe you when you say that it's actually unaffordable. The question could be, well, is it really unaffordable, or do you not, your situation? Because every other day in the press, I'm reading something about these other districts that have not managed money optimally. So, unified voice, as always, in all our communications is important. More important than in this issue than probably in some other issues. Without naming this specific district, some of you will probably know. There's a district that I read about in the news recently where their teachers were out on strike, and the union marched to one of the school board members' homes, and I think she came out to speak to them, or subsequently she made some sort of remarks in response to that, which broke ranks with the rest of the board. So when something like that happens, it's very challenging, and there's nothing you can do about that as a PIO. That's really a governance issue and how the board is conducting itself. But to the extent that you can control the message, designated spokesperson model, one person, just to make sure that everything is streamlined and they have the whole context, the whole track record, the history. I think that's really the best way to go. And as I said before, this person needs to be plugged in. They need to get immediate updates when the team comes back from the bargaining table. I know comms is not always fully integrated into the cabinet, which it should be 100%. But if not, then you need to make sure that you're getting that information. Um, One thing that you can do is to put yourself and your district in a better position, and this is probably my number one piece of advice would be to have regular updates to your community on your specific budget situation locally and then the state budget. That way, when you get into these situations where there's some sort of labor negotiation or someone's challenging what you're doing financially, they have a better understanding. And it doesn't seem like you're opportunistic. If the first time that you're communicating about the state's budget situation, it looks like you're sort of is when you're in a contract negotiation, then it looks like you're defensive, right? But if you're updating monthly or quarterly or in whatever your newsletter or your Parent Square or what your PCR, whatever communications you're using, then it's different because you've already established yourself as a regular go-to information channel for knowledge about the budget. And then it just seems more natural. You're building on top of that as opposed to being reactionary and just fighting this battle with the union. And as much as possible, try to educate the public on the negotiation process or what you're allowed to say and not say coming out of negotiations and what the larger context of the state budget is, and explaining that a lot of times people don't understand that you have to have joint decision making. They say, well, why doesn't the district just do this? Or why don't they just say that? So my colleague, our general counsel, Kristen Lindgren Brazzoni, actually is very good about talking about the specifics of what is allowed under law. And but there, I mean, I'm sure all of you have legal counsel that can also provide that information, and it's helpful to set that frame for the community so they know why maybe you are or are not doing something that they expect. And then I think it helps to maintain regular contact with your political officials, your city council people, your county supervisors, the mayor, maybe even your congressperson if they get involved in these type of issues, just so they understand that you are not taking an anti-labor position. You're taking a pro-fiscal responsibility position that is going to preserve a stable environment for kids where we can do good work to educate them. Most in our state, California, most politicians are labor aligned, if not directly supported or endorsed by labor. In the great part of the state, I know that they're part of the states that lean GOP, and that's less of an issue there. But most people live in the Democratic dominated parts of the state. And so there's a natural sympathy or affinity from our political officials toward labor. Again, often they were endorsed, supported labor campaign for them. So keeping them in the loop and letting them know that you're acting reasonable. This is not about union busting. It's about responsibility, and we are giving as much as we can without jeopardizing our future. This is helpful for almost any campaign, but I think it's very critical for collective bargaining. Your stakeholder map, who are your audiences? So obviously staff, principals, and other administrators. And then externally, parents are going to be huge, particularly if you have a very active community. As we mentioned earlier, the natural sympathy is toward the teachers. So you need to start early as possible to communicate your position to the parents and guardians who recognize that teacher as the face of the school district, the one that's supporting their kid every day. Community organizations, I mean, this will vary according to your environment. When I was in Oakland, we had so many community organizations, and they had a really outsized role in the city in working with the media and in terms of shaping the opinion of regular people. It won't be to the same extent anywhere, but having those people hear your message can be helpful, and sometimes they can even be advocates for you if your district is in a situation where maybe you are not seen as the most trusted source, but this community organization that's out there doing social service for people is, perhaps they can be an extension of your message if they're sympathetic. We mentioned local elected officials, media, that goes without saying. And I mean, don't forget the taxpayers who do not have students in school. Often those people are very responsive to a message of fiscal responsibility, and they have an impact as well. So perpetual calm cycle, that's my first principle. We talked about this earlier. You gotta start, if you can, before collective bargaining begins. Uh, I've been through all this already, so I won't read the slide again, but constantly explain the state and federal situation. And one point I will hit that I didn't stress before is show them the money that you are spending in an accessible way and how that tracks to the values and the mission of the school district and what your goals are for student outcomes. There should be some evidence of this in the LCAP. I know the LCAP is often a burly document, but if you can pull some key elements out of that and show, okay, this is why we are spending money to increase literacy by third grade. or here is what we are doing to drive student achievement for our high need students or our students who are on the wrong side of the achievement gap. And this costs a significant amount of money. If we spend money that we don't really have, um, in another area, which could be, compensation, benefits, or whatever, we won't be able to make the same investments in these priorities that we as a community have agreed on through the LCAP process. Always talk about what you're doing for recruitment and retention of staff, to make it known that attracting and keeping good teachers is a high priority with you. And whenever there's something that impacts the overall budget situation, use that to update if there's a drop in the stock market, if the governor withholds $5.6 billion from Prop 98 that should go to schools. The May revise coming up will certainly be one. Those are opportunities to sort of renew that communication about these are the constraints that we're working in. So principle number two, shared mission. I touched on this as well. I don't think you should be afraid to say teachers union has a point. They're asking for a lot of good things. We want teachers to get paid more. We agree teachers are underpaid. The barrier to teachers getting paid more is not at the district level. It's what's happening at the state. We would love to have smaller class sizes, but smaller class sizes have a huge expense. And there's a lot of tension between smaller class sizes and higher wages or compensation. Because if you have fewer students in a class, you have more classes, which means you have more teachers, which means you're cutting the total wage and benefits pie into smaller slices, which means each teacher is getting less. So you have there again that point about there's some contradictory demands in the positions. Yeah, we can move on to the next one. Meet people where they are. This is about a communications practice. To the extent possible, if you can go beyond the formal district channels, your newsletter, your website, your parent square, what have you, that's good. We talked earlier about cultivating allies and partners who can explain your position. That also includes the local political officials. I have found success in some case going to pre-existing events, setting up booths where there are, at a fair or some sort of social event in the city, having some collateral there, just being available to talk to people, to hand out material and information. When I was in Oakland, which has a big religious components, sometimes we would go to churches. They're usually pretty receptive if you ask them to have a short opportunity to speak on a Sunday, and explain your position or what you're trying to do with kids and why you have the theory of action that you do for your school district, your churches, synagogues, mosque, wherever you're, or it could be the YMCA, it could be some other social organization where there's a place of comfort for people. And you're plugging into that as opposed to asking them to come downtown or wherever your district office is. Maintain credibility. We've already touched on these a little bit, but always be accurate. You can't make mistakes about what's been offered or what your situation is. I mean, that goes without saying. I know everyone's trying to be accurate, but if you make even one mistake, that's just going to be replayed over and over again. Union's going to make a lot of hay out of that. So always be double checking, with your CBO, CFO, or your negotiator. Again, you're talking about issues and not about the teachers themselves. So make sure you're not personalizing or blaming everyone and always be the adult in the room, have the responsible tone. Don't rise to the bait of the ad hominem attacks. And we talked about the credibility killers, making a final offer, then moving the numbers, saying the union offer is unaffordable, and then turning right around and granting that. So a core, this is sort of an outline that you could use to construct a core narrative. Yeah, educators do incredibly important work, and we want to reward teachers. Our ultimate goal is to produce high quality outcomes for all students. That requires tough choices that put students first, and financial constraints mean we can't meet every demand. Yeah. An approach to sustainability serves today's students and staff and tomorrow's students. I think this one is one of the most important. I mean, the other ones are somewhat obvious, but the district talks a lot, or the unions will talk a lot about our students need this. Our staff needs this. We have a responsibility to kids. And so I think a response to that is yes, we have a responsibility to today's kids, but also to tomorrow's kids and the kids that will come after that. I have a kid in fourth grade, I have a kid in first grade. If we give away the farm now, what is the experience of my first grader going to be when they're in middle school, when they're in high school? So we are serving the students by having a responsible offer. But the scope of responsibility for the school board is bigger than just any one moment. And yeah, it would feel really good to give in to the temptation, but we can't set ourselves up for failure later. Um, Again, that a point we talked about earlier about how if we overspend now, then you're going to get those service cuts and layoffs that you say you want to avoid. Because right now we are not in a horrible situation in terms of the state of California economy. And one thing that the LAO, the Legislative Analyst Office, which is a very respected independent evaluator of the budget, has said over and over again is that California's revenue system is so heavily dependent more than any other state on revenue from the top earners. Particularly since our property tax system doesn't allow for big year-to-year increases in property tax revenue. So, basically you have it's been described to me as three main planks or a three-legged stool. You you have your income tax revenue, you have property tax revenue, and then you have your sales tax revenue. So in California, we kind of kicked out one of the legs of that three-legged revenue stool because we have caps on how much your property taxes are increasing. So that just means that the revenue that you're getting from property does not rise in alignment with its appreciation. And you don't want to go into all those details because as soon as you start talking property taxes, people are going to freak out. But I'm just saying this, for your information. So because of that, and because we tax high earners very, very heavily here, most of our revenue comes from a very small percentage of people. And I forget the stat, whether it's like the top 5% are paying something like 50% of all revenue. It's something crazy like that. So the people who are earning at that level, wages are generally a very small percentage of their income. It's mostly capital gains or other investments. And so when the stock market goes down, their income goes down massively. Unlike a person who makes a regular wage, if you make 50,000 last year, you probably make about 50,000 this year. But the higher income people, their income is so variable according to what their investments are doing. So when the stock market goes down, our budget crashes basically. And right now, the stock market has been pretty good. But one thing that the LAO says is that it's dependent so heavily on AI. And I'm not qualified to say whether AI companies are overvalued, but some people think it is a bubble. And if it does burst, then our economy is going to crash and there are going to be severe cuts at the state level, which have a huge impact. So all that is to say, we're not even really in a the worst place in terms of the state budget, and still so many districts are on the precipice. So if you overspend now and then that rainy day does come, then you're really going to drive over a cliff financially. So you have to keep it in check. And that goes to point number seven. We're offering what we can while maintaining solvency, and we can't just live for the moment. We have to look for the future. We already covered this in some of the previous comments, so I won't read the slide for you. But some of the specific complications around the economic context that's making it challenging for students, the rising healthcare costs, 4 or 5% a year, and sometimes more when you renegotiate. special education, more kids are being identified for special education, and more of a higher percentage of those students who are being identified have some sort of significant or severe disability that usually requires a higher level of support and more expense. When the special education program IDEA was introduced federally, the federal government promised to pay for 40% of all state and local expenses. Right now, the federal contribution accounts for about 8% of special, maybe it's 9, it's between 8 and 9% of special education expenditures in California. So you can see that's a huge gap that's been made up locally. But again, that means that there are less resources that could be used in another fashion. Transportation's getting more expensive, as are utilities, and that was before this latest blip where gas went up. So even things like that happen on the other side of the world impact what we're doing here locally in California. And the pension increase ever since they redid the pension system to try and make the state system more solvent by pushing state contributions down onto local school districts and public entities. It's caused STRS and PERS contributions to skyrocket. And again, that's money that we're not investing in other areas. Student need is increasing. The high need student percentage has been rising constantly. Something pushing 60% of all our students are low income if you define that by free and reduced lunch, I believe. So, and in certain districts, it's going to be much higher than that. You have districts with unduplicated counts in LCFF over 90%, right? So that student need is great. Declining enrollment, this is a tough issue to explain elegantly to the public, but it's a very real issue. I know a lot of people think, well, first of all, California has always been a growth state until relatively recently. We've never dealt with declining enrollment until, really these last several years. So this is new for us, and our system isn't really built to account for declining enrollment, especially since we're on the ADA model, and I know you know how that works versus enrollment. So I won't get into that. But the misperception that people have about the impact of declining enrollment is, well, you have fewer school students, so you should need to spend less. What's the problem? What are you complaining about? But, when kids leave, as you know, you don't have 25 kids from one classroom that leave the district all at once, or you don't have 500 kids from one middle school that leave all at once. It's a kid here in one class, a kid here in another grade, 3 kids across town. It doesn't create sort of any economies of scale. You still have all the same overhead, right? So you still have the same number of teachers, basically. You still have the same number of classrooms. You still need a custodian. You still need someone to serve at lunch, school resource officer, somebody to monitor the playground at recess. You have all the same costs, but you're getting less money. So that's putting our districts in a bind. COVID, the expiration of the one-time COVID relief funds. We always advise our districts, please don't spend one-time or short-term funds on ongoing costs, because when those one-time funds run out, how are you going to continue paying for that service or that employee? But understandably, because it was such a crisis during the pandemic and our districts were trying again to be in the moment and respond to that need that kids had, a lot of districts did allocate one-time or short-term funds to these ongoing costs. Now they have to figure out how do they pay for that, or they have to get rid of that service or that employee. So that's also part of the economic context. Also, retrenchment in the federal government without getting political about it. Obviously, the federal government is trying to step back a little bit and turn it over to the states. That's going to be an issue ongoing. And then, unfunded mandates. The state is passing initiatives, implementing programs constantly and not fully funding or sometimes not paying at all for these programs. And it really adds up. And that's money that we can't necessarily spend at the local level in a way that makes the best sense for our community, because they're passing these blanket mandates that apply across the board to all districts and county offices. We touched on this earlier. Just explain the trade-offs. If we're putting money here in a bucket for additional compensation, how is that going to affect these other priorities that we need to stabilize and provide the environment for a high quality education? So opportunities for community education. So pretty much every year recently, when the governor releases his budget proposal, they will promote it as record funding for schools. A little bit misleading because it doesn't, recognize the real value of money, how the revenue that they're giving to schools compares to the way that the costs are rising. For instance, you only get a 2.4, I think this year the COLA is 2.41% or something like that. We all know that the real cost, though, of educating students and running schools is increasing more than that. So it's not really record funding in terms of money you can use, especially when you consider that Prop 98 manipulation that I'm talking about, the money that they're holding back. And then when you talk about all the other elements that we just discussed that are complicating for your educational context and your financial context, it's not really record funding. The state wants to make it seem like it's happy days. So definitely push back on that. We talked about the rising costs. Also, you have some funds that you don't have full discretion over where you can spend them, and that impacts what you can do in collective bargaining as well as just in providing supports for students. And the importance of keeping a reserve so you don't go insolvent when times get tough. So another sort of frame or approach to responding to some of the claims or demands of we can't wait is again, shared goals as much as possible. We support what you're doing. Explain, provide sort of a timeline for your community about what is going to happen next. So at least things are less shocking and they can prepare themselves and then, put it in the context of what's happening statewide. So these are communications channels I'm sure many of you are operating. You can consider putting up a special page on your website devoted to bargaining updates, so people over time know where to go. I've always found FAQs to be helpful. Again, your average parent isn't going to read an FAQ on collective bargaining, but you have that, 10%, 20%, depending on your district, who are engaged and who may sit down with it. And those people can often be, information creators through word of mouth. So I think it's worthwhile to do that. And I've always found when I create FAQs, it's helpful for me when I'm talking to media, and I can use that as a reference. Or if I'm preparing a speech or something, it also comes in handy. Superintendent messages are another good one. People always want to hear from the top dog. So I mean, you probably don't want to put your superintendent out there too much, but I think at certain critical times in the negotiation, people need to hear from the leader. Obviously, at board meetings and then newsletters as well. You can try and earn to get hearings with editorial boards to present your position. Sometimes they can be sympathetic and obviously cultivating local media, which I'm sure you do all the time anyway. And then creating toolkits for other organizations that just have some fact sheets or explain your position, the larger state budget, things that can make people more sympathetic. Um, if a weekly updates is a proposed communications cadence, that may not make sense for everyone. I think it really depends how intense labor management relations are in your district and also where you are in the collective bargaining process. But certainly if it looks like you're heading toward impasse or there's a strike, I think that weekly rhythm, so people at least feel, okay, we're not just here in the void, they're communicating with us and keeping us updated. And then whenever there's a big development, you need to update your community on that. And then don't wait to correct misinformation. Again, do it in a sober, factual way, not in a personalized fashion, but you need to jump on that as part of rapid response. We already kind of talked about the meeting people where they are, so this just goes into more detail about what that could look like. I won't read that. Same with this. Yeah, and for each stakeholder group that you're trying to appeal to, map, what is their angle? What do they care about the most? What misinformation or what partial information that lacks context are they most likely to be exposed to, and what arguments could help rebut that misinformation? And how best does that group like to get information? Are they the type of people who are going to read an FAQ? Or would a video be better in person? And just making sure that you have the right communications channel for each audience. And then sort of kind of stepping back as you develop your communications calendar, these are some landmark events that you can use to inform people about what's going on in the state budget, and then use that as a gateway to talk about your local situation. And I don't think this is necessarily comprehensive, but any major state and federal budget developments, recurring events would be January 10th when the governor delivers his state budget proposal. And CSBA and a lot of our partner organizations send out very detailed analysis of that budget. So you can just draw from that. If you guys aren't receiving CSBA emails, please let me know and I will put you on there. And Calsberg gets a lot of that same information. Some of you probably have access to AXA or CASBO, and they have good stuff as well. So we always put out information in January for the governor's budget proposal. In May, the May revise. In June, when the budget is agreed on and signed by the governor, and at various points in between. Locally, you have your own budget development milestones, and those are important communication opportunities. LCAP adoption is another one, and then all the different points in the communication cycle leading up to when you have an agreement. This is what I call fact versus fiction framework. Schools are flush with money. No, we're not. Push back on that. Districts control the revenue stream. Again, no, we're not. The state is 80+% of the revenues. Districts are hoarding reserves. No, districts are being responsible so that we can provide not just for today's students and staff, but for those to come. Other districts are doing it, so you can too. Every district situation is different. We're making decisions based on our students, our staff, and our situation, and we're not just being Me Too followers. And if you cared about students, you'd meet our demands. And you'd say that we do share a lot of your goals, and some of your demands in the abstract make sense, but in the specific context of our reality, it would be irresponsible and a disservice to our students to overpromise and overdeliver in a way that causes us to fail later on. And then we are hurting students, which is what you're trying to prevent now. Again, you just keep your eye on flyers, monitor social media, community listservs, what's going on in the local press, and then determine, is this at a level where we can let it pass? It's venting. Is there some sort of substantive claim that needs a real response? And is there some reputational damage where it's a triage situation and we have to get on it right away? So that's just another way of framing that there. And I think the ideal outcome is through all your communications efforts is to create the conditions for a sustainable agreement that does improve compensation without jeopardizing the programs that you need to support students and without jeopardizing the solvency of the district. Constantly keep students at the center and talk about concern for the future. Don't rise to the bait, counter invective with information, and present yourself as the adult in the room and a sober, responsible individual. And I think that's how you can put your best foot forward for the district or the COE. And that's it.
Wonderful job, Troy. I did have one question earlier that I wanted to bring up. Kelly, do you want to say it yourself, or would you like me to just let him know?
I can jump in. So we have we avoided a strike, thankfully, but we were close and we were right ahead of um our neighboring Bay Area districts. But that being said, they're still at the table for ongoing issues, and our union seems to be hanging their hat on philosophy statements that really don't have any business being anywhere in contract language. So just curious if you've got suggestions around that, because they're really starting to villainize the district for not including philosophy statements in contract language.
Could you give me an example of what you mean by a philosophy statement?
Um, so, while they're arguing class size, they're putting stipulations on said class size. Um, they're putting other stipulations on prep periods, and so things that wouldn't have that go beyond labor law.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to think about that a little bit. So to reframe, make sure I understand, you're saying that they are asking for commitments in terms of class size or similar issues about working conditions that you are not able to meet financially. Is that it? And they want you to commit to say we will not have class sizes above 25 or whatever. Is that it?
A little deeper than that. I mean, they're asking us to go above and beyond labor law and ed code and to put that in legal binding language.
Okay. Well, again, this is something obviously you should discuss with your attorneys. I don't give legal advice, but without seeing the specific demand, if you have it on good authority that they are asking you to do something which is outside of ed code or outside the law, I think that's something that you should share. And if you've discussed it with them and they're resistant and there's no room for compromise, you've determined that you can't work it out, then I certainly think that's something that you can share with the community, not in an editorial fashion, but say, there are certain limits that are beyond our control that are contained in ed code and state law, and we are bound by those, and that's our responsibility as management is to make sure that we're following the law and that we are not creating liability for the district because that's just one more way that you can uh, threaten your financial situation. Again, I could probably, if I saw the exact demand, maybe I could provide a more specific response.
Thank you.
And Troy, we have another question. Claudia wrote that she's been tempted to pitch an op-ed about the fact that her district is doing really well fiscally, but she doesn't want to tarnish neighboring districts who are having layoffs, and she doesn't want to jinx them. So, any advice for bragging about what great financial shape you're in?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I mean, it's good that you have such concern for your neighbors, but ultimately, your primary responsibility is to your district. So, I mean, I think a way that I might frame it is if you have good, would you characterize your district as having good labor relations for the most part? Yes. So I think you could do something, and it would be really powerful if your superintendent had an op-ed co-authored with your union leader. I don't know if they would go for that, where you could say, we've worked together in a difficult financial environment to establish these shared priorities and to organize our finances and our contracts in a way that supports our shared values and rewards our employees while also being responsible and protecting our future. So nothing is guaranteed. The economics are unpredictable, but we are pleased that our collaboration has led us to a strong spot financially, and we're going to do our best to maintain that, something like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. Any other questions for Troy?
Yeah, I've got a quick question. Could you go into a little bit if there's any smart kind of key messages in response to when they get really personal about cabinet salaries and raises and literally almost like I feel like I don't know where the end game is, but it's almost like that they should be refusing it. So our district is really going hard against the Me Too clause, which our district has, and that admin should just give it back for them. And so I've just been struggling thinking about that message and how to frame that.
Yeah. So I've been struggling with that my entire career. I don't know if there's a great answer for that. When I was in Oakland at one point, we were very sensitive to these same sort of attacks. And so higher management, at central office, higher central office staff got together, and I think we gave back, I don't know, 10 or 15% of our salary for a couple years, and it made exactly zero difference. So, um, yeah, we just had less money. And it's not like it was a substantial amount of money to make a meaningful effect on, what was provided to students. It was a symbolic gesture, and those aren't always without meaning, but the practical impact was very, very little, and it didn't gain us any grace. I mean, I think what I tell people is that for most districts, central office expenditures are about 5% of the total budget. I mean, sometimes a district will get up around 12%. I've seen them up there. Um, but certainly, I mean, ideally you like to be under 10%. That gives you a stronger position rhetorically. And I would say, yes, teachers are the most important component in student success. Nobody denies that, but there are a lot of complicated elements to running a school district. It is a large organization with all sorts of different employees serving different roles. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes that we don't necessarily expect people to care about. But when you interact with a state, there's programs that require auditing, that require administration, applying for grants. Uh, the facilities don't run themselves. All these people that that are employed under the central office umbrella, they are providing important services that create the environments our kids need to learn, that create these good work conditions that CTA is rightly fighting for. And it's disingenuous to think that you could run the district without administrators. And yes, administrators often are well paid, although there are a lot of low paid central office employees as well. And I think that that goes under the radar and is worth mentioning. But usually there's one or two people in these roles compared to many teachers, depending on the size of the district. And typically, teacher compensation is somewhere around 80% of total expenditures. And so you can reaffirm that we are directing the overwhelming majority of our revenue toward teachers, but we also need competent and capable administrators, and we will pay them at a rate that we think is necessary to acquire good people and sustain the operations we have. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend like that's going to be a winning argument. It's not going to convince very many people, but I think that's the truth. And some people who maybe step back and can look at it a little bit more objectively will understand that.
Well said, Troy.
You.
Yeah. Thanks, Diego, for dropping that in the chat.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Troy. I know that a lot of our members have felt really challenged by a variety of things that are coming together at this particular point in time. So it's so helpful for them to hear from someone who's been around the block a little bit and kind of has a very high level perspective of everything that's happening and such a great approach. I love a lot of the frameworks that you provided for folks because so many times in the past, we've seen districts make the mistake of villainizing teachers or getting themselves pushed into a corner where they're arguing against the very things that they're usually for, which is, great quality work environments and teaching and learning. And I really appreciate that the frameworks that you provided allow us to honor our teachers, continue to tell good stories about what's happening, reaffirm our values, but also explain reality. So thank you for everything. And thanks for being a good partner over the years. We've
Oh
benefited
yeah,
so
and
much.
thanks. I just want to take this opportunity real quickly to say, we appreciate Calspra. The listserv has been great for us at CSBA, and I just noticed, Naj was on here. I'm sure it's helpful for him at AXA, and he, you know, chips in with their lunch breaks, which are great explainers on key issues. But it really helps us. I'm constantly sending stuff to our legal team, our policy team, our GR team when you guys are raising issues or sharing some of your solutions to these problems. And I don't respond that much, but it's a huge source of information to keep us in touch with what's going on with districts. So yeah, we love being partners with CalSPRA.
Fantastic. It's good to know that our challenges can become solutions for others. Before we say goodbye, I do want to share a few things. In the chat, I'm going to give you the survey. We have a generalized event feedback form that CalSPRA, you guys know, we're data driven. We want to improve constantly. So this is one that we have for all of our smaller events, webinars, regional events, etc. And then I wanted to tell you about a couple of things that are coming up. We have one on a new intranet and one on user first websites, March 25th and then April 13th. So we'll put those two in the chat as well. That's the registration link. And those are our last two webinars based on the 2025 conference. And if you know how we do things at CalSPRA, we count on you to rate the conference sessions, and then we pick the highest rated sessions to then bring back for webinars throughout the year. So, in case you haven't filled it out yet, if you went to a session at CalSPRA and you're like, everybody at CalSPRA should be exposed to this session, the way Kendra felt when she saw Troy the first time talk about this, then I'm going to give you the conference survey link. So please get in there and tell us about the sessions that are not to be missed and should absolutely be back. And then two more things I'm going to share that are longer term opportunities. So we have the communication plan, how to create effective and flexible communication plans. This is capped at 25 people. It will take place in late May through mid-June, and we meet once a week for 90 minutes. The reason it's capped is that you get personalized feedback and you actually work through your comms plan during the course. So I will put the link in there for that. And we are bringing back the School Communication and Community Engagement Certificate Program that will start in June. So the links to both of those programs are in the chat as well. And I think we will have more things coming up, but that will be based on your feedback in the conference survey. We'll be selecting those webinars the week after next. So please get in there next week if you haven't yet and vote for those sessions that we really need to make sure that we bring back. That's everything that we have at CalSPRA, CSBA. Troy, thank you again. This was fantastic, and I know is going to make a lot of people feel a lot less alone as they're navigating this landscape. Take care, everyone, and I will stick around in case anyone has individual questions. Thanks again. Hey, Diego.
For the last ones again, like always, and then there's Amanda
I
Wilson.
know, I know.
Oh, it's just us now again. I don't know if you want to try with the recording.
I am.